welcome. So good to have you here on this Thanksgiving weekend. We kick off this new series, Best Gift Ever. My name is Paul McGinnis. I'm not often here at our Dixon City campus, but so good to be here with you this weekend. And if I had to guess, I would say this weekend looked a little bit like this for you. Thursday, you ate too much, and then Friday, you shopped too much, and Saturday, you slept too much. And so now you're here today, try to cleanse the system, right? And we'll start again this week. Or maybe you just ate too much from Thursday until now. I don't know. But however your weekend has gone so far, I'm so glad that this is a part of it. So glad that you've joined us. And as I said, we're kicking off a new series, nestled right in here between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Because really, if you think about it, those two holidays at the core are really about the same thing, aren't they? They're about us turning our attention back to God and thanking Him for giving us the best gift ever. And so that's what we're going to focus on these next 3 weeks. And really, if I could just give you this series in a nutshell, this series is all about re-gifting, right? Some gifts are just too good to keep to ourselves. And you're familiar with re-gifting. You've all done it. Don't try to pretend you haven't. Like, you get that gift from somebody, and you, from the moment you see it, you have no intention of ever keeping it. You just are already thinking, now who can I give that to? Right? Who do I not have to buy a gift for anymore because I'm just going to give them this? And so you thank the person because you truly are grateful, not for the gift, but just that they saved you from shopping for a gift. And so you take it from them, you keep it all nice, and then you pass it right along, right? We've all done it, no problem. In fact, I brought one of the classic re-gift options for my family. I grew up with 4 siblings, and sometime in recent years, these have made their way under the tree. And now every year they just get passed along from one to the other, right? These stylish yellow running shorts. They were probably my sister's, Kristen maybe, and she probably outgrew them or something. So now she's passing them on to us. I don't know where they started, but every year somebody's going to get these bad boys. Do you want me to show you how I look with these on? Too bad, because some things are best left to the imagination, and that's not even one of them. Well, we're talking about re-gifting, and I don't want you to just think about the cheesy, corny gifts that we re-gift, like as gag gifts. I want you to think about that stuff that you've received that you literally cannot wait to share with somebody else, right? And maybe you'll literally give it to them, or maybe you just can't wait to use it, to kind of bless it. Maybe it's that kitchen gadget, right, that you just can't wait to use and prepare that thing that it does and, kind of host people with it. Or maybe it's that book that you just love and you're buying extra copies so you can give away to other people. Maybe it's that piece of technology that you just got, you just love it, you're telling everybody about it, how they have to get one. Or maybe you're one of those folks, you're like a virtual regifter, like the tips and tricks that you've learned. You're like posting them and following people and sharing stuff because you've received something and you legitimately just can't keep it inside. You have to share it with somebody else. That's the kind of regifting that we're going to be talking about throughout this series. In fact, let me just give you an illustration of what that looks like. Perhaps the very first encounter of regifting we find in the scriptures in Luke chapter 2. Listen to this. While they, and this is talking about Mary and Joseph, while they were there in Bethlehem, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord." When the angels had left them and had gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." So they hurried off, and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. And listen to this. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. Best gift ever. The gift of God, of his Son. Right? John tells us that God loved the world so much that he gave his only Son. He gave his Son, Jesus, as our rescuer. And the shepherds, as soon as they get word of this, as soon as they receive the gift, what do? They immediately start regifting it. right? They've seen with their own eyes, they've realized what's happened here, and now they begin to share that story with everyone that they can possibly think of. And that, my friends, that's what this series is about. And if I can sum it up this way, this whole series is about re-gifting Jesus. I bet you never thought of that phrase before, but that's really what it's about. Receiving this gift that God's given to us and then finding ways to share this gift with the loved ones in our lives. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the whole series, and then we'll dive into our topic for today. We're going to do this series in 3 parts, okay? We're going to talk about demonstration, and then conversation, and then invitation. Right? Say that with me. I'll say it, and then you repeat it. Demonstration, conversation, and invitation. That's right. And that's how we're going to re-gift Jesus. That's how we're going to share this best gift ever. First of all, today we'll talk about demonstration, the way that we live our lives, just the very rhythm of our lives, the things that we do, the things that we say should point to the fact that we've received the best gift ever. And the next week, Mark Fitch is going to share with us about those conversations that we get to have, those spiritual conversations, those significant conversations when we get to share with others about this gift and what God has done in our lives. And then 2 weeks from now, Jason Castelli will share about how we can use invitation as a key piece of sharing this best gift. Why not come and see for yourself? Come and join us. Come and check this out. Demonstration, conversation, invitation. Or if you like to think of it this way, you've heard of show and tell. This is show, tell, and see for yourself. I tried to make that one rhyme. So you go show, tell, and see for yourself, right? It's demonstration, conversation, invitation. That's where we're going for this series, and I really hope that you'll join us all 3 weeks here at Parker Hill. For today, we're going to dive into this first part, demonstration. And here's what I want you to remember. On the back of that connection card, there's a spot for some notes. If you don't write anything else down, write this down, tweet it, post it. Remember this. The way we live should show we have something to give. The way we live should show that we have something to give, right? The very rhythm of our life, the things that we put our minds to, the things that occupy our time 24/7 should show that we've received something that we cannot keep to ourselves. The way we live should show that we've got something to give. We have something to offer people. We have something that's changed our lives, and we want to share it. Now, I didn't get that myself. I didn't make that up. I found that from this passage in Matthew. Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is speaking. This is the best gift ever that we just read about in Bethlehem. He grows up. He begins to gather people around him. His first set of followers are gathered on a mountain. And in Matthew chapter 5, he helps them to see who they are and what they have to offer. Matthew chapter 5 says this, You and you alone, he says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You and you alone, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So Jesus is helping his followers understand what it means to be one of his followers, right? Once they've received this gift, they've embraced Jesus into their life, it changes who they are. It changes their DNA. And he says, listen, you're different now. And he gives them these 2 analogies. He says, you're like salt. You're like light. And I want to just drill down on that a little bit because I think over time we might have lost some of the significance of those metaphors. Maybe not the second one so much, but certainly the first one. Like, why would Jesus compare us to some kitchen condiments? Like, we may not understand that because to us, he's not saying you're the oregano, you're the bay leaves. He's talking about salt specifically because especially in that day, you need to realize how valuable salt was. Salt was used for so many things that we don't even recognize anymore today. This is in a day where there were no refrigerators, there was no, freezers, and so salt was a great preservative. If you had to keep some meat or something else from spoiling, you could rub it with salt or bathe it in salt. Salt was a great healing agent, right? It was used to clean out wounds. It was used to prevent infection. Salt made things better. Salt was distinctive and unique. It was valuable. In fact, Mark Stenzi was talking to me about this. He said that in some cultures, you would actually be paid your salary in salt. right? So it saves you from having to go out and buy it. It was a common element of the day, and it was valuable. And so you would be paid, instead of in cash, you'd be paid in salt in some cultures. And Mark went on to tell me that that's where we get the phrase, that guy is worth his salt. That made no sense to me because I've never once heard that phrase before. But maybe if you're of Mark's generation, maybe you've heard that phrase. Maybe that's a good connection for you and other people like you and Mark. Mark also was telling me, perhaps from personal experience, that a significant battle in the Civil War, maybe he was there, I don't know, but he said a significant battle in the Civil War was the Battle of Salzburg, right? Because of the salt mines that were there in that village. It was a very valuable town, and so it was a significant battle. See, that gives us a sense that salt, it's got value. It brings out flavor. It preserves. It heals. And Jesus is saying, you know what? That's kind of like your role in this culture as well. And then he says, you're like light. This one we understand a little bit more clearly. Light has not changed all that much. In fact, light is the very first thing God creates, right? He says, let there be light. And everything goes from there, right? Light illuminates, it guides, it directs, it dispels the darkness. And Jesus says, you know what? That's kind of like your role as well, right? We ought to be like salt, unique and distinctive. We ought to preserve and heal. We ought to be like light, making a difference, guiding the way, showing direction, dispelling the darkness. Jesus says, that's who we are. The way we live should show that we have something to give. But right in the passage, there's a warning there, right? He says we can't just assume that we're just going to continue to be salty and continue to be bright. He says there's a danger here, right? If the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's not good for anything except to be thrown underfoot and trampled. He says neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. So he says there is a danger. Yes, this is who you are, but don't just assume that you're always going to be as potent and as effective as you can be. He says there's a danger that we would lose our distinctiveness, that we would lose our unique flavor, that we would become just like everybody else, that we would essentially not have any worth, right? If we end up hiding our light under a bowl, if we end up just secluding ourselves into places that are already comfortable and well lit, he says, what good is that? And so if I were to sum up this passage in Matthew, I would say this: stay bright and salty. Stay bright and salty. Make sure that your life continues to be unique and distinctive and different. Make sure that it stands out, that it shows that you've received the best gift ever. And make sure that you continue to advance into places of darkness where that light and that salt are needed so that you can have an impact and make a difference and be who God has called us to be. Does that sound like your life? Does that sound like the day-to-day lives we're living, bright and salty, living in such a way that shows the world that we have something to give? This theme of light and salt, of our identity, of how we can pass on this best gift ever, this comes up all over in the New Testament. Let me show you another of my favorite passages here. Just not long after Jesus' death and resurrection, the Apostle Paul writes a letter to that group of believers that are following after Jesus, that are following after the way. And listen to what Paul says to the believers in Colossae. He says this: be wise in the way that you act towards outsiders, right? Towards those that aren't yet part of the faith, that haven't yet found their way back to God. Be wise in the way you act. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And I love what Paul's drawing out. He's saying the way that we live should be different. We should be making the most of our opportunities. Our conversation should be flavored with salt. And then he says, be sure that you're ready to answer the questions. Now, what does that assume? It assumes people are asking questions. It assumes that the way that we live is raising curiosity. The way that we live is turning some heads. The way that we live is so exquisitely different than everyone else in our culture that people can't stand. They have to turn around and say, you know, what's with you? How can I get some of what you've got? Why are you so bright and salty? Where does all that joy come from? How can you forgive her for that? Where does that grace come from? Why aren't you spending your money the way the rest of us are spending our money? Right? Why are you not stressed and financially strapped? You know, what's with you giving away a percentage of what God's given to you? How do you do that? You know, what's with you sponsoring kids on the other side of the world? How does that help you at all? Why aren't you renovating your house as often as we're renovating ours? Why haven't you upgraded yet like the rest of us have? Why aren't you guys living together like everybody else is? Why aren't you shacking up and making sure you're compatible? Why are you living differently? Why don't you talk like the rest of us? Why aren't you shading the books at the office like the rest of us? Why don't you come out with the guys on Friday night? Your wife's never going to know. Why do you treat your wife so well? Why do you respect your husband after all he's done? Why are you investing so much time in your kids and passing on your faith to the next generation? Why are you living so differently than the rest of us? Or are they not asking the questions? Have we lost our saltiness? Do we look exactly like the people around us, the rest of our culture, the rest of our neighbors and coworkers and classmates? Have we lost our saltiness, or have we just secluded ourselves to places that are already well lit and comfortable, having no relationships with people that are outside the faith, that have yet to find their way back to God? Is anyone asking the kinds of questions that we're supposed to be ready to answer? I told you if I could summarize the Matthew 5 passage, I'd say, stay bright and salty. If I could summarize this passage in Colossians, I would say this: live a questionable life. You heard me. Live a questionable life. Your life should be raising questions. People should wonder, why in the world are you living like that? Why aren't you, expanding? Why aren't you spending more? Why aren't you living to the edge? Why are you living the way you're living? Our lives as followers of Christ should be so exquisitely different that people can't help but turn their heads and wonder, what is with those people? What has gotten into them? The way you live should show that you have something to give. I told you this was over and over in the scripture, so I want to show you a couple other examples. Not only does Paul write that letter to the people in Colossae, he writes another letter to a man named Timothy, a pastor in the first century. And in the letter, not to Timothy, to Titus. He wrote to Timothy as well, but I want to show you something in his letter to Titus. He writes to Titus and he explains to Titus, this pastor, here's what you should teach the men. Here's what you should teach the women. And then he says in verse 7, in everything, set them an example by doing what is good, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about you. That's the kind of lives we should be living, so that the people that oppose, we can't find anything bad to say about them in their conduct, in the way they live, the way they act. Then he goes on to say, here's what you should teach employees, how they should interact with their masters, with their bosses, not to steal from them, but to show that they can be fully trusted, so that in every way, listen to this, they will make the teaching about God our Savior attractive. Do you realize that the way that we live our lives can make our teachings attractive? That's what salt does. That's what light does. People see the difference that it's made in our lives, and they wonder, what's with that? How can I get some of that? And then listen to how Paul finishes out this paragraph. He says, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. Best gift ever, right there. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, right? To stop living like everybody else is living, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself up for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. You catch that? That's why Jesus came. That's what he wants to do. He wants to purify for himself a people that are his very own, that are not living like everybody else, that are not doing what everyone else is doing, but people that are set apart, eager to do what is good. People that have received this gift and are letting it spill out of them, and it's making everybody else turn around and notice. That's the kind of lives we should be living. Peter says the same thing in a letter that he wrote. Right? We've been looking at some letters that Paul wrote. One of Paul's friends, one of Jesus' other followers, is a man named Peter, and he writes some letters to the believers in the first century. And he says to them, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Verse 15, for it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. The way you live should show you have something to give. It should show that you've received something that has fundamentally changed your DNA and turned you into something else. And we're never going to do this perfectly, but we continue to walk with God and get to know Him and receive His grace and love, and then we let that spill out of us. And that makes us so exquisitely different from anyone else in our culture that people have to wonder, how did we get like this? How do we have so much joy and peace and hope and purpose? How did we get so generous and forgiving and patient? And with these words ringing in their ears, these letters written to the early believers, they actually started to do this. The believers in the first century, the second century, the third and fourth century, they started to live this out. They were the best people in their culture, the best people in their communities. And I want to just share with you a slice of history from the 4th century. From the Roman Empire, there was an emperor named Julian the Apostate. I don't think that's the name that his mother gave him, but that's what historians have come to know him as, Julian the Apostate. And we have all these letters that Julian wrote to his governors in the 4th century Rome. And Julian talks often to his governors about this group called the Galileans. That was his way of talking about the Christians, because Jesus was from the area of Israel known as Galilee, and Julian would write about these Galileans, and he was beginning to get worried because more and more pagan Romans were turning and becoming part of this sect called Christianity. They were joining these Galileans, and they were growing in number, they were growing in their influence, and Julian the Apostate is getting nervous. And he begins to explain to the governors why he thinks their movement is so attractive. And he doesn't tell the governors it's because of what they're doing when they gather on the weekends. It's because of their worship. It's because of their prayers. It's because of their Bible study. It's because they're going door to door. It's because they're doing this or that. Here's what he says in his letters to his governors. We will lose this empire to the Galileans because they feed people not part of their tribe. They care for the dying and the weak. They tend the graves of those who pass away. They treat their wives well. They treat slaves as brothers. Julian realized that there is something exquisitely different about these people, and it's changing this empire. And we are going to lose this empire, this pagan empire, because of these Galileans. And do you know what his strategy was? He didn't try to oppress them like Nero did, right? A few centuries earlier, Nero tried to obliterate the Christians. He burned them at the stakes. He destroyed them. He tried to persecute and kill them. That didn't work. Julian tries a different tactic. He doesn't try to oppress them. He tries to outdo them. He literally tries to outlove the Christians. He writes in his letters to the governors, we need to be as loving as they are. We need to try to do better than they're doing. But they couldn't do it. The pagan Romans could not live like that because they had not received the gift to begin with. They couldn't just force themselves to be loving and compassionate. It's not something we can contrive. It's something that flows out of us when we've received the gift of God. And friends, the same is true for us. We're not just forcing ourselves to be kind and loving and compassionate. We are drinking deeply from who God is, and we are letting Him spill out of us. And when that happens, the Christians in 4th century Rome toppled the Roman Empire. And if that were to happen today, if the brothers and sisters of God, if the people of Jesus Christ would let Him spill out of us, we would turn our culture and our world right side up. It would make a difference in your community when you start loving your neighbors that way, when you start treating your coworkers that way, when you start loving your spouses that way. That will turn heads. That will make a difference when you live like you have something to give. I don't need to tell you this. You've done it. You've seen it. You've been on the receiving end of it. You've had those moments when you've gone the extra mile to help a neighbor, and you've seen the impact that has. Or when you've lent a listening ear to a coworker who's going through a tragedy. You've seen what kind of conversations that sparks. You know what happens when you show those acts of kindness or compassion, when you speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves, when you stand up for the oppressed. You know the impact. You know the conversations that spark from that. In fact, you were a great example of this last Christmas. Last Christmas, you remember what we did around Christmas time? The whole compassionate Christmas thing, the global goats, do you remember that? Last Christmas, you had the opportunity to provide micro farms for our partners in Kenya and in Haiti, right? There were some of the poorest of the poor families in those communities just needed a little help, starting some sustainable income with a chicken or a goat or a cow or a pig. And you, the people of Parker Hill, gave $22,000 so that goats and chickens and pigs could be given to some of the poorest of the poor families. And I want you to take a look at some of the impact of that giving. Watch the side screens.
Ndina mwana we hagu tari nyina no tari we ni dare ndire ngine nyina agikua na ile agikua ndi kana kau niko nini ndirateithagia nikari kinyu akaria ka ng'ombe ya ciara nyamu na ciara mburi na ti mwana mugi ni mwana mukirimu ona utuka ni akiaragia ndari ndu amenya ona wa thukuru uathia go gukunyia muthenya ku.
Thank you so much for giving in that way, for living in that way. And let me just tell you, let me give you a glimpse of the impact that that continues to have. I've been to some of those homes. I've seen some of those families, and it's making an eternal difference because we gave those gifts through the local churches in those communities. Those pastors were the ones that were delivering that and helping in such tangible ways. And now, nearly a year later, those same pastors have gained such great respect in that community that thanks to another project funded by a family here at Parker Hill called the Rejoice Project, those same pastors have been given access to all of the elementary schools in Caragoto, the public elementary schools, and they go in every month and present biblical virtues and explain how you can have hope and life and love, and they tell the story of Christ to the 1,000 students that are in those elementary schools because of the reputation that they've gained in that community. That's what happens when you live in a way that shows you have something to give. And it wasn't just the global goats. Just a quick snapshot of last year, Compassionate Christmas, not only $22,000 for goats, but 800 gifts for local organizations that are doing a great work in our region and in Wilkes-Barre. And then truckloads of toys that were passed along to families looking for gifts for their siblings. This is what's been happening here. This is what you were a part of last year. And because you lived in that way, it started to raise questions. It started to be kind of bright and salty. It started to provide the way for conversations and questions and invitations. It's been fantastic. And we want to give you the chance to do that again this year. So here's the moment that you've been waiting for. Finally, we get to open our gifts. You thought I was going to make you wait till Christmas Eve. No, some of you, I know, you opened these already. I know how you are. But go ahead and get your gift. Open it now. Slide everything out, and I'll talk you through what we've got here. All right, get all that ready. Nice. I'm going to put the Hershey Kisses aside for a second. You should do the same. Here's what I want you to see first. This card here. Compassionate Christmas, it says, the blue and yellow card. This is our chance to come alongside some organizations in our community that are doing great work, that are serving the poor and the less fortunate in our neighborhood. And I want you to take note of the campus and the service that you attend, and I want you to see the organization that you're going to come alongside. Right? And we've gotten in touch with those organizations, said, how can we bless you this Christmas? How can we come alongside what you're doing? And so take a look at the service that you're part of. Take a look at some of the gift requests that are there. And then here's your chance. In the next 2 weeks, go out and purchase some of those gifts. Don't wrap them. Bring them back on December 14th. and we'll pass them on to those organizations. Should you wrap these gifts? No, you should not wrap these gifts. Should you bring them back next weekend? No, you should not bring them back next weekend. You should bring them back unwrapped on the 14th, okay? If you're unable to do that, let me know. We can work something out. But it would be great if you would follow the instructions that we've printed on the card. But here's how we can come alongside these organizations. Be bright and salty. Live a questionable life. Buy gifts for people you don't even know. That's going to start to raise some questions, right? Who are you shopping for this year? I have no idea, but here's what they want. And why are you doing that? And off you go in a conversation. All right, that's what you can do locally. Globally, just like we did last year, we have an opportunity this year to come alongside our partners around the world. It's not goats. They've got lots of goats now. This year, you're familiar with this. Take out this orange envelope. It says pour it on. You were part of this back in February when our students kicked this off. And then in July, we finished up phase 1. And right now, the first ever school in Malioret, Haiti is in operation. And there's 4 classrooms running beautifully. 2 for preschoolers, a classroom for first graders, and a classroom for second graders. But guess where the third graders are? Under a tree. The 3rd grade class in Malioret, Haiti is still meeting outside. And I'd like to give them a classroom for Christmas. And I think we could do that. I think the people of Parker Hill could come up with $15,000 and build a classroom for the 3rd graders in Malioret. If you'd like to be a part of that, all the information is here. You can give online, you can give a check or cash in this envelope before the end of the year, and we'll see if we can get the 3rd grade class out from under the tree. And my guess is if you start doing that, if you start giving money to build a school in Haiti, if you start buying gifts for people you don't even know, that's going to start to raise some questions. And when those questions start coming, here's what you turn to next: the red Christmas celebration card. And you say, you know what? I'm just doing this because I've received a gift that I just can't keep to myself. You want to learn some more? Why don't you join me? We've got all these Christmas celebration options on the 21st, the 23rd, the 24th. All of those are identical celebrations. So find one that's going to work well with your schedule. Better yet, work your schedule around one of those and then invite someone. Don't come on your own. Come with a coworker, a family member, a friend who has yet to receive the best gift ever. As you start living a bright and salty life, a questionable life, you may have the opportunity to offer an invitation to somebody to join us and hear about the best gift ever. And then take a look at the Rest and Reflect card. That'll let you know what's happening here the week after Christmas. And then finally, your favorite part, the Hershey Kisses. Some of you have already eaten them. I'm sorry to see that, because only one of them is for you. And then in honor of this whole re-gifting thing, one is for you to pass on to somebody else, right? Bah humbug to those of you that scarfed them down already. One is for you, and one is for you to re-gift, just to go along with our theme, to make that memorable for you. Okay, go ahead and pack your stuff up so you don't lose it, so you can take it home with you. Go ahead, put it all back in there. Very good. Just some tools that we want to offer to you to help you not only accept, but then pass on the best gift ever. Let me read something from an article. This is in Relevant Magazine. In fact, we'll post this on our Facebook page later on this week. The article's called How to Share Your Faith Without It Being Awkward. And they say being known as someone who is putting their best into their work and into the way they live, who is loving and respectful of those around them, will set you apart and will have people questioning the source of your energy, your joy, your fervor, and your gifts. Invest in your relationships in every circle. Be proud of your identity in Christ and be excellent in what you do. This is an excellent way to share your faith. The way you live should show you have something to give. Now, I could end there. Maybe some of you wish that I would, maybe I should, but I want to just go on for another couple minutes just to give you a preview of what happens next. Right? What happens when we live that kind of life? How do we move from demonstration into conversation? And this is what we're going to unpack next week. You do not want to miss next week. Mark Fitch is going to bring this teaching, and this is part of his DNA. Part of his spiritual gifting is having these kinds of conversations and inviting people into a relationship with Christ. You don't want to miss this. Here's what we find in the scripture, 1 Peter. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. This is exactly what we've been talking about, right? The lives that we're living should show that we've got this hope bubbling up inside of us. That's going to prompt people to ask us questions. Why do you have that hope? And then we're prepared to give that answer. And when we do give that answer, don't overdo the salt. Don't blind them with the light. Do this with gentleness and respect. This isn't a debate. You're not winning an argument. This isn't a confrontation about religion. It's a conversation about a relationship. We're not trying to get something from people. We have a gift to offer to them. And I just want to give you one example of what that could look like. One of my favorite books on this topic is called Speaking of Jesus. Highly recommend it. Speaking of Jesus by Carl Medeiros. And here's a story that he tells. I didn't put it on the side screens. It's a little lengthy, but I think it'll be worth it. He says this: one day I saw my Muslim Arab friend sweating as he talked with my other friend, a fine, conservative-minded evangelical Christian. It looked as if the two had locked horns in a battle to the death. It happened here in Colorado this past summer. We hosted a gathering of some of our longtime friends from the Middle East and brought a bunch of American Christian friends to talk about God, the Middle East, and how to bring hope to Muslim countries. There were about 45 of us together for 3 days. We were having a great time until I looked over and saw these two all tangled up. The next thing I knew, my Muslim friend, not yet a follower of Christ, had gone out on the deck and was smoking a cigarette like his life depended on how fast he could suck it down. I walked out and nonchalantly said, "What's up, bro?" His response, "Why do all these people want to convert me? Why can't they just leave me alone? I know you don't want to convert me, right?" Whew, talk about a loaded question. Here's my answer and what happened. I asked him what he thought my other friend wanted to convert him to. He said, he wants to convert me, he wants me to be a Christian, but I'm a Muslim. I asked him what he thought my friend meant by becoming a Christian. He wants me to stop living in the Middle East, to stop loving my family. I told him I was pretty sure that's not what my friend meant, but if that is what conversion to Christianity is, then I agreed he should not convert. "See," he said to me, "I knew you weren't into all this conversion stuff." "No, I'm not," I said. "Not like that, not at all. I think you should stay in your country, love your family, and be who God has made you to be." Then I asked him this: what do you think God thinks when he looks down at these 7 billion people on earth? "He thinks they're all screwed up," he said. "Yep, that's what I think God thinks as well." So what do you think God would like to do with all these messed up people? Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, nothings, everyone. He had never thought about that before, so he wasn't quite sure. But he did say that God would probably want to help them not be so screwed up. I agreed. So you might say that God would like to convert all 7 billion people on earth, not to a religion, but to himself. He would like everyone to be like him, to be converted into him. But how would he do that? He would need a converter. I went on to tell my friend that if he bought an appliance here in the States and tried to take it back to the Middle East, he would need something to change the current from 110 to 220. "What's that called?" I asked him. "A transformer or a converter," he said. That's right. So what is God's transformer? To get us all back to the way God wants us to be, to change us, to convert us. He gasped, literally gasped, and said, "It's Jesus." I never thought of that before, but it's Jesus. He's the converter. He got so excited, he called his wife out, and he told her the whole conversation. She started to cry. We sat on the deck and we prayed that God's converter or transformer would change us into the current that can be connected to God, and that he would do this with all of our friends and family. It was a profound moment. Amazing that just half an hour earlier, he was about to bite off the other guy's head for trying to convert him. And now he sat with me in tears, praying for conversion. That's how you share the best gift ever. With grace and gentleness and respect. That's what it looks like to live a life of demonstration and then follow it up with a significant conversation. Because see, friends, here's the story. God gave us the best gift ever, the converter, the rescuer, the redeemer, our only hope. And if you've not yet accepted that gift, I would love to help you take that step. And we could do that today, or you could come back next week and we'll explore it some more. And if you've received that gift, your life should be so exquisitely different from anything this world has ever seen that they can't help but start asking some questions. How'd you get so bright and salty? Why are you living so different? Where does all this peace and joy and hope come from? And it gives you the chance to not only receive, but to then re-gift the best gift ever. The way you live should show that you have something to give. I thought about closing by going back to that passage in Matthew, but rather than reading it to you, why don't I just have you take a look at it on the side screens?